So Stephen King has said that he doesn't like to be labelled as a horror writer, just a writer, and I think similarly it would be a shame to just call this film a horror film because there's so much to it, and it kind of seems to me like the Stephen King of Stand By Me and The Shining, for instance, combined in some ways. As a filmmaker, how tricky was it to balance those tones of the coming-of-age drama and also the horror elements?
Well, I've been influenced by Stephen King growing up as a reader, so he has a lot to do with who I am as an artist right now. So I think his style of writing and his narrative was forming in me. So it's not alien for me to combine different elements and create like hybrids of. I wouldn't call it hybrids, but it's basically constructing a compelling character-driven drama, even if you're doing a horror movie. So it's basically my will to transpose those values into the movie, but also it has to do with my upbringing as a storyteller, and a lot of that has to do with Stephen King himself. Sorry.
And you place us very much in 1989, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your guiding principles for the production design, the cinematography, the costumes, because you do it without fetishizing the period. And without making those little details there, like the posters in Bill's bedroom, for instance, the movie posters, or the film showing at the Capitol, the cinema in Derry, without making those distracting, but they're there.
I didn't want to put elements that were too interfering with the narrative, and the 80s are, there's enough of the 80s for people to relate to the era without perceiving too many artificialities. There's a lot of, musically, there's a lot of contributions from the 80s, and there's one in particular that tells you a lot about that era. Also, my experience I grew up in the 80s, so I know that the 80s, even though I didn't grow in Bangor, Maine, which is the base for Derry. I lived through those era through those years, and I know that it wasn't all about like shoulder pads and hairspray and neon signs, right?
And you capture the essence of Bangor very well, actually. I happen to have been there quite a few times. I love that POV shot from the painting's perspective, which is kind of a surprising moment in the film. I won't give away sort of exactly when it is, but I think audiences are probably quite sophisticated now, say, compared with 20 or 30 years ago when it comes to being scared in a movie. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the balance of building the tension but finding new ways to scare an audience.
Well, you always have to look inside and see what scares you. Before you try to scare people, you have to know what scares you, because it's the most like genuine way of doing things. And what the things that scare me might not work for the majority of the people, but I know that there's like a big chunk of people that will understand. And of course, there's things that are like conventionally scary, and there's some of those, but some of the scares are very related to my own experience growing up, and there's like specifically literal translations of my fears into this movie.
And just finally, will we get to see a 2016 set part of a sequel to it, I guess, or the next part?
I certainly hope so.
Great, Andy, thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.